The frontrunner for the US Democratic Party's 2020 presidential nomination has provoked bipartisan anger by staunchly defending literacy programs in Fidel Castro's Cuba. The self-styled socialist's remarks were initially made in a CBS interview, in which he also stressed he condemns all forms of authoritarianism.
We're very opposed to the authoritarian nature of Cuba. But it's unfair to simply say everything is bad. When Fidel Castro came into office, you know what he did? He had a massive literacy program. Is that a bad thing?
Senator Sanders' comments on Fidel Castro are ill-informed and insulting to thousands of Floridians. Castro was a murderous dictator who oppressed his own people. His literacy program wasn't altruistic. It was a cynical effort to spread his dangerous philosophy and consolidate power.
After 4 years of looking on in horror as Trump cozied up to dictators, we need a president who will be extremely clear in standing against regimes that violate human rights abroad. We can't risk nominating someone who doesn't recognize this.
Fidel Castro left a dark legacy of forced labor camps, religious repression, widespread poverty, firing squads, and the murder of thousands of his own people. But sure, Bernie, let's talk about his literacy program.
Well, the campaign team of Bernie Sanders' rival, Mike Bloomberg, was quick to try and capitalize on the divisive comments. It posted a series of satirical tweets with the hashtag #BernieOnDespots, imagining the Vermont senator lavishing praise on a number of tyrants and perceived strongmen. However, it later deleted them after facing criticism. Well, let's get some live reaction. We're joined by Daniel Shaw, Latin American professor at City University of New York, Richard Goodstein, political consultant and human and labor rights, Dan Kavalik. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen. Great to have you all on the program today. Daniel Shaw, that is, if I can start with you perhaps. I don't think anyone can argue literacy is a bad thing. Literacy programs, that's probably, we can all agree on that. But isn't this an error of judgment on Bernie Sanders' part, given there are lots of countries with good literacy programs, with social programs, and robust human rights records? I mean, this is surely shooting oneself in the foot before an important electoral race.
Yeah, once again, the spineless Democratic establishment shows their true colors. It's like a litmus test every time. You can't say one positive word about Cuba or utter one word in defense of Venezuelan sovereignty. They want to make sure there's no critique, anti-imperialist critique of the U.S. foreign policy establishment. So this is a very sophisticated form of censorship to try to narrow the perimeters as we have more and more debates within the Democratic Party coming up.
Richard, would you agree with that? This is censoring debate, narrowing the scope of the discussion. Is that something you'd agree with?
No. What we're trying to do is make sure we have a Democratic nominee who can beat Donald Trump. And if a Democratic nominee is somebody who, look, famously, Mussolini was commended for having the trains run on time. So if we have a Democratic nominee who is tipping his hat to Castro, the murderer, for having a literacy program, or Noriega, or, having spent his honeymoon downing vodka after leaving a sauna in Russia and extolling the virtues of the Soviet Union in ways that, frankly, most Americans don't much agree with, that's a problem for people who think that Donald Trump is a danger to the future of the United States. So it's not just a question of censorship or narrowing things, it's making 100% sure we have a nominee who's electable. And the concern is once the public realizes what Bernie Sanders has said in the past, he's an unreconstructed socialist, and the United States, that's generally not a calling card.
Dan Kavalik, regardless of your views on Castro, on Cuba, or on socialism even, I mean, surely, like we said earlier, Bernie Sanders saying this thing at a time when the Democratic Party is already split, it's divided, it's going through perhaps a bit of a PR image here, crisis. I mean, this is a really bad decision, isn't it?
Well, look, I think Sanders, to me, shows his integrity here. Look, he's been saying this for years. There's videotapes of him saying these things about Cuba and Fidel Castro and the Soviet Union. I mean, how can he backtrack on those things honestly? He's just, reaffirming ideas that he has had for many years. Meanwhile, the idea you can't say something good about someone like